Who told you to play that? Daniel Kang's voice cut through the mansion at 2 in the morning, and Naomi Carter's fingers froze above the piano keys. The final note lingered beneath the vaulted ceiling before dissolving into a silence so complete that Naomi could hear rain tapping against the tall windows. She turned slowly. Daniel stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, his expression controlled, but his dark eyes fixed on the piano as though Naomi had opened a door that had been sealed for years. 3 weeks working in the Kong estate had taught her that the Korean Mafia boss rarely raised his voice. He never needed to. People lowered theirs when he entered a room. Naomi rose from the bench. Nobody told me, Mr. Kong. His gaze shifted to her. Then why are you touching it? Naomi swallowed. She had been finishing the downstairs sitting room when she noticed the piano beneath a thin layer of dust. The mansion contained enough marble, dark wood, and expensive furniture to fill a museum, yet somehow it always felt empty after midnight. She had lifted the cover only to clean the keys. Then she recognized an old melody her mother used to play when Naomi was a child. One note became another. She had not known anyone was awake. I was cleaning, she said. And then I played a little. Daniel stepped into the room. His eyes returned to the piano. That song. Naomi waited. Where did you learn it? My mother. Something changed in his face, small enough that another person might have missed it. Naomi did not. I am sorry if I crossed a line. Daniel's jaw tightened. My wife used to play it. Naomi had heard whispers about Mrs. Kong, but the staff had been clear about one rule: never ask. She looked at the framed photograph near the piano, a smiling woman standing beside Daniel beneath spring blossoms. I did not know. No, he said quietly. You did not. Rain traced silver lines down the windows. Naomi expected him to dismiss her. Instead, Daniel walked toward the piano and stopped beside the bench without sitting. His hand hovered above the polished wood, then fell back to his side. She died 3 years ago. Naomi felt the instinct to offer sympathy, but something about his expression stopped her. He had probably heard every careful sentence grief taught strangers to say, so she gave him something simpler. This house sounds lonely. Daniel looked at her sharply. Naomi almost regretted it, but she continued. That is all I meant. I thought maybe it needed music. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Daniel's expression closed again. Never play it again. Naomi nodded. Yes, Mr. Kong. She lowered the piano cover carefully and walked toward the doorway. When she passed him, Daniel did not look at her. Naomi crossed the dark hallway and disappeared toward the staff quarters, leaving him alone with the rain and the instrument he had avoided for 3 years. Daniel remained standing there long after her footsteps faded. Then, slowly, he sat on the bench. Dustless keys gleamed beneath the warm lamp. He placed one hand above them, hesitated, and pressed a single note. The sound was quiet, almost fragile, but for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Kong did not walk away from it. 3 weeks earlier, Naomi Carter had arrived at the Kong estate carrying one suitcase, a thermos of coffee, and the determination to keep her new job uncomplicated. The property sat beyond the northern edge of New York City, surrounded by acres of carefully maintained trees and stone walls, with a long driveway that curved toward a mansion of gray stone, dark windows, and immaculate gardens. Naomi had worked in expensive homes before, but this place felt different. Nothing was neglected, yet nothing felt lived in. Victor Han, Daniel Kang's longtime advisor, met her inside the entrance hall and explained the household rules with quiet precision. Staff arrived on time. Private offices remained private. Guests were never discussed outside the estate. Mr. Kong was not to be disturbed during business meetings. Then Victor paused beside a pair of closed wooden doors. And nobody touches the piano. Naomi glanced through the narrow opening between them. Understood. Victor continued down the hall. Naomi followed, but over the next several days she discovered that the piano was only one piece of a larger silence. Fresh flowers never appeared in the formal dining room, even though empty crystal vases stood on every sideboard. The curtains in the breakfast room remained closed until noon. A bedroom on the second floor stayed locked. Behind the house, an iron gate separated the main lawn from a garden nobody entered. Even the staff seemed trained to move quietly, as if ordinary laughter might disturb something sleeping inside the walls. Daniel was usually gone before Naomi began her morning work and returned after sunset. When she did see him, he was courteous without being warm. Good morning, Miss Carter. Thank you, Miss Carter. Never more than necessary. He ate dinner alone at the end of a table built for 12 people, often reading documents while his food cooled beside him. Some nights Naomi passed his study after midnight and saw a light beneath the door. Other mornings, she found untouched tea on his desk, cold enough to suggest it had been sitting there for hours. Nobody mentioned Grace Kong until Naomi accidentally found her photograph while dusting the library. Grace stood beside Daniel beneath pale spring blossoms, smiling toward the camera while Daniel looked at her instead. Naomi was still studying the photograph when another housekeeper named Patricia entered. "Do not ask," Patricia whispered. Naomi lowered her cloth. "I was not going to." Patricia looked toward the hallway before continuing. "Mrs. Kong passed away 3 years ago. After that, everything changed." She nodded toward the photograph. "The flowers disappeared first. Then the music. Then the garden was locked." Naomi looked again at Daniel's face in the picture. He seemed younger, but that was not what struck her. He seemed present. The man Naomi knew moved through his own home like someone completing obligations. "Does he ever talk about her?" Naomi asked. Patricia shook her head. "Nobody asks about Mrs. Kong." Naomi respected that. Grief belonged to the person carrying it, and she had no intention of treating Daniel's pain like a mystery she was entitled to solve. Still, she began noticing the spaces Grace had apparently left behind. An empty vase. A locked garden. A silent piano. Curtains that blocked the morning sun. It was as though Daniel had preserved his wife's absence with the same discipline he used to control everything else. Then, late one evening, Naomi entered the breakfast room to collect a forgotten tray. She stopped beside the windows and looked at the heavy curtains. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to soften the horizon. Naomi reached for the fabric and pulled it open. Golden light spilled across the dark floor. She did not know it yet, but that small act would be the first thing Daniel noticed. Daniel noticed the sunlight before he noticed anything else. He entered the breakfast room shortly after 7 the next morning and stopped beneath the doorway, his hand still resting on the folder Victor had given him. For years, the room had greeted him with shadows. Now pale morning light stretched across the hardwood floor, touched the long oak table, and warmed the empty chair opposite his own. Naomi was arranging clean linens near the sideboard when she realized he had not moved. "Is something wrong, Mr. Kong?" Daniel looked toward the open curtains. "Who did that?" Naomi followed his gaze. "I did." A pause. "Why?" "There was a sunrise." She said it so simply that Daniel almost seemed confused by the answer. Naomi expected him to order the curtains closed. Instead, he walked to his usual chair and sat down. "Leave them." That became the first change. The second came 2 days later when Naomi found a neglected orchid near the library window. Its leaves had begun curling, and the soil was dry. She moved it into better light, trimmed away what could not be saved, and watered it carefully. A week later, a small white bloom appeared. Daniel noticed that too. He noticed everything. Naomi was beginning to understand, even when he pretended otherwise. Then came the tea. On nights when his study light remained on past midnight, Naomi began leaving a cup of Korean barley tea outside the door. No note, no knock, no attempt to start a conversation. The first cup remained untouched until morning. The second disappeared. By the fourth night, the empty cup had been placed neatly on the hallway table before Naomi returned to collect it. Daniel never thanked her. Naomi never expected him to. Then one evening, she was polishing the silver handles on a cabinet when his voice came from behind her. "Miss Carter." She turned. Daniel stood several feet away holding the empty teacup. "Yes, Mr. Kong? Why do you keep doing things I never asked for?" Naomi looked at the cup, then at him. "Do you want me to stop?" He considered the question longer than necessary. "That was not what I asked." Naomi folded the cloth in her hands. "You work late. You forget to drink anything." The tea was already in the kitchen. "And the curtains?" "Morning light is free." His mouth shifted almost imperceptibly. "The orchid." Naomi glanced toward the library. It was dying. Daniel's expression became serious again. "You seem comfortable changing things in a house that is not yours." The words were controlled, but Naomi heard something beneath them. Not anger, unease. She could have apologized. Instead, she answered honestly, "I am not trying to change your house." "Then what are you doing?" Naomi thought about the silent dining room, the closed curtains, the cold cups abandoned beside paperwork. taking care of what is already here. Daniel said nothing. Naomi returned her cloth to the cart, then added, "Not everything worth doing needs permission." For one dangerous second, she wondered whether she had crossed another invisible line. Then Daniel looked down at the cup in his hand, and something unexpected softened his face. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough to surprise them both. "Good night, Miss Carter." "Good night, Mr. Kong." He walked away. The following morning, Naomi entered the breakfast room and stopped. Daniel was already there. The curtains were open. The orchid sat in the center of the table, its single white flower facing the sunlight. Beside Daniel's papers rested an empty cup of barley tea. He did not mention any of it. Neither did Naomi. But for the first time since she arrived, the house did not feel entirely asleep. The iron gate behind the mansion had been locked for so long that Naomi assumed nobody remembered where the key was. Beyond it, a narrow stone path disappeared beneath overgrown ivy, leading toward a garden hidden behind tall hedges. One cool Saturday morning, Naomi found Victor Hahn standing near the gate while a groundskeeper worked on the lawn. "What is back there?" she asked. Victor's expression became guarded. "Mrs. Kang's garden." Naomi looked through the iron bars. Roses had grown wild around a weathered arbor. Several shrubs were brown at the edges, and fallen leaves covered the path. "Nobody takes care of it." Victor adjusted his coat. Mr. Kong asked that it remain untouched. Naomi understood the meaning immediately. Untouched did not mean forgotten. It meant protected. Still, over the following days, she watched through the windows as the garden deteriorated. Then a groundskeeper mentioned that several plants might not survive another cold spell. Naomi hesitated for nearly an hour before asking him for the key. She knew she was crossing a boundary. She also knew dead flowers could not preserve anyone's memory. By late afternoon, she was inside the garden wearing work gloves, clearing leaves from around the roots of a struggling rosebush. The place must once have been beautiful. Stone benches curved beneath maple trees, faded ceramic planters lined the walkway, and a small fountain stood silent near the center. Naomi had just finished removing a broken branch when a voice stopped her. "What are you doing?" Daniel stood beyond the open gate. He wore a dark overcoat over his suit, one hand resting at his side, his face completely still. Naomi slowly removed her gloves. "The plants needed attention. I gave instructions that nobody enters this garden." "I know." His eyes moved across the cleared path, then toward the rosebush. "Then why are you here?" Naomi could hear the restraint in his voice. She chose her words carefully. "Because some of them are dying." Daniel stepped through the gate. "They were Grace's." "I know." "Then you should have left them alone." Naomi looked around at the brittle leaves and neglected soil. "Mr. Kong, they are not staying the same." His gaze returned to her. "They are dying." Silence settled between them. Daniel looked toward a wooden bench beneath the maple tree. For a moment, he seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "She planted those roses the first spring we lived here," he said quietly. "She complained that the soil was terrible. She spent weeks fixing it herself." Naomi waited. "After she died, I did not want strangers changing anything." His voice lowered. "I wanted one place to remain exactly as she left it." Naomi's expression softened. "I understand." Daniel looked at her. "Do you?" "Enough to know why you locked the gate." She glanced toward the roses. "But keeping something untouched is not the same as keeping it alive." The words left her before she could reconsider them. Daniel's face tightened. Naomi lowered her eyes. "I am sorry. That was not my place." She picked up her gloves and walked toward the gate. Daniel did not stop her. He remained beneath the maple tree as evening light filtered through the branches, staring at the garden he had preserved by refusing to enter it. The next morning, Naomi came downstairs expecting Victor to tell her she had been dismissed. Instead, she passed the rear windows and stopped. The iron gate was open. A groundskeeper was watering the roses. Daniel stood several yards away holding an old pair of gardening gloves, watching quietly as sunlight reached a place he had kept closed for 3 years. The garden changed first, but Daniel changed with it. Within 2 weeks, the stone path was visible again. The fountain had been cleaned, and tiny green shoots appeared beneath rose bushes Naomi had thought were beyond saving. Daniel never thanked her for opening the gate. Instead, he began appearing in the breakfast room while she worked nearby, lingering over tea instead of carrying his papers immediately into the study. Their conversations started with ordinary things. Weather. Coffee. The terrible traffic on the West Side Highway. One morning, Daniel noticed Naomi smiling at a message on her phone. Good news? He asked. My mother finally agreed to replace her refrigerator instead of pretending the strange noise it makes is normal. Daniel almost smiled. Is she stubborn? Naomi looked at him. You would recognize the condition. This time, he actually laughed. It was brief and quiet, but Victor, passing through the hallway, stopped for half a second before continuing as though he had heard something impossible. Daniel began speaking about Grace too. Never for long. He told Naomi that Grace loved thunderstorms and hated expensive restaurants with tiny portions. He told her the garden had been Grace's idea because she believed every large house needed one place where nobody cared about business. Naomi listened without offering solutions. She never told him to move on. She never said Grace would want him to be happy. She simply allowed Grace to exist in conversation without turning her memory into something fragile. Daniel began seeking that feeling more often. Then one Friday evening, Naomi was called into his study. A cream-colored envelope rested on the desk. Sit down, Daniel said. Naomi remained standing. Am I in trouble? No. He slid the envelope toward her. Inside was an offer with a salary nearly 3 times what she earned. Daniel had created a new position for her as his personal companion and household coordinator. Naomi read the page twice. You want me to stop housekeeping? You should not have to do it anymore. Her eyes lifted. Why? Daniel seemed surprised by the question. Because you are capable of more. That is not an answer. He leaned back slightly. You have changed this house. You have changed my routine. I trust you. Naomi placed the paper on the desk. And you want to pay me to stay close. Daniel's expression tightened. I am offering you a better position. You are trying to turn gratitude into a job. Silence filled the study. That is not what this is. Then what is it? Daniel looked toward the window. The garden was visible beyond the glass, alive again beneath the evening light. When you are here, this place feels different. Naomi's heart softened, but the answer also frightened her. Daniel. It was the first time she had used his name. His eyes returned to hers. I care about what happens to you, she said. But I cannot become the reason you refuse to learn how to live when I am not standing in the room. Daniel became completely still. Naomi pushed the envelope gently back across the desk. Grace cannot be replaced, and I will not let you turn me into another way of avoiding the empty spaces she left. The truth hurt precisely because there was no cruelty in it. Daniel looked down at the untouched offer. For years, money and authority had solved almost every practical problem placed before him. Naomi had just shown him a problem neither could solve. I thought I was helping you, he said. Maybe you were, Naomi replied softly. But now you have to decide whether you want to heal, or whether you only want me close enough that you do not notice you are still hurting. Naomi submitted her transfer request the following Monday. She did it quietly, without drama, handing the paperwork to Victor Hahn before beginning her morning duties as though nothing had changed. Victor read the first page, then looked at her over his glasses. Does Mr. Kong know? Not yet. He will ask why. Naomi folded her hands. Then I will tell him. Daniel found her that evening in the breakfast room, where the curtains were still open and the orchid now carried 3 white blooms. He placed the transfer request on the table between them. You are leaving. It was not a question. Naomi nodded. At the end of the week, Daniel's expression remained controlled, but she recognized the old instinct behind his silence. He wanted to solve the problem, change the salary, change the position, change the decision. For a man accustomed to controlling almost every circumstance around him, acceptance did not come naturally. Is this because of what happened in my study? He asked. Partly. Naomi looked toward the garden beyond the windows. I think staying would make things easier for you right now, but easier is not always better. Daniel said nothing. You opened the garden, she continued. You started eating breakfast again. You spoke about Grace without shutting down afterward. Those things belong to you, Daniel. I do not want you believing they only happened because I am here. His eyes lowered to the transfer request. Where will you go? The Halston Grand needs a housekeeping supervisor. Better hours. More responsibility. A feint. Sadness crossed his face. And your mother's refrigerator? Naomi smiled. Already replaced. She complained about the price for 4 straight days. Daniel almost smiled back, but the moment faded. I could ask you to stay. Naomi met his eyes. You could. He understood what she meant. His influence could create incentives, opportunities, obligations. But none of those things would be the same as her choosing to remain. Daniel slowly folded the transfer request and returned it to her. Then I will not. Naomi felt something tighten in her chest. Thank you. On Friday evening, she carried her suitcase through the entrance hall. Patricia hugged her. Victor shook her hand and told her the house had become noticeably louder since she arrived, which Naomi decided was his version of affection. Daniel waited near the front doors. For several seconds, neither knew what belonged in a goodbye like this. Take care of the orchid, Naomi finally said. Daniel glanced toward the breakfast room. That sounds like an order. Consider it professional advice. A small smile reached his face. Goodbye, Naomi. Goodbye, Daniel. She stepped outside. He did not follow. The door closed softly behind her, and the mansion became quiet again. But this silence was different. That night, Daniel entered the kitchen himself and prepared barley tea. The next morning, he opened the breakfast room curtains before sunrise. In the afternoon, he walked through the garden without waiting for a groundskeeper. He stopped beside Grace's roses, removed a few dead leaves, and stayed until the evening air turned cold. Days passed. He continued. Then, one rainy night, Daniel stood outside the piano room. For 3 years, grief had taught him that avoiding a memory was the same as protecting it. Naomi had taught him nothing of the kind. She had simply refused to help him hide. Daniel opened the door, crossed the dark room, and sat at the piano. He placed both hands above the keys. This time, nobody was there to play the first note for him. So Daniel played it himself. Grace's anniversary arrived beneath a clear November sky. For the previous 3 years, Daniel had treated the date like a locked room. He canceled meetings, dismissed the household early, and disappeared behind the doors of his study until midnight passed. This year, he woke before sunrise. The mansion was quiet, but the curtains were open. In the kitchen, he prepared barley tea and stood beside the window while morning light slowly reached the garden. At 9, Victor entered carrying Daniel's schedule. I cleared the day as usual, he said. Daniel looked at the leather folder in Victor's hands. Put the meetings back tomorrow. Victor paused. And today? Daniel picked up his coat. Today I have somewhere to go. An hour later, he stood alone at Grace's memorial with a bouquet of white flowers. No associates waited beside him. Victor had offered to come, but Daniel had declined. Some distances had to be crossed without witnesses. He placed the flowers carefully and remained standing in silence. For years, he had believed grief was proof of loyalty. Every closed curtain, every untouched piano key, every dying rose had become evidence that Grace still mattered. Now he understood how easily love could become confused with refusal. I opened your garden, he said quietly. The words sounded strange after years of speaking only inside his own thoughts. You would probably tell me I waited too long. A faint smile touched his face and disappeared. He remembered Grace returning from that garden with soil on her gloves, complaining about stubborn roses while refusing to let anyone help. He remembered music drifting through the house. He remembered laughter at a dining table that had later become a place where he ate alone. Daniel lowered his eyes. I thought loving you meant I had to stop living when you did. The truth settled into the cold morning air. I thought if I enjoyed anything again, I was leaving you behind. He waited, almost as if memory might answer. Nothing did. Yet the silence no longer felt like punishment. I was wrong. Daniel remained there until the sun climbed higher. Then he said goodbye, not to Grace's memory, but to the life he had built around her absence. When he returned to the estate, Victor was waiting in the entrance hall. Daniel removed his coat. Have the staff open every curtain downstairs. Victor studied him. Every curtain. Every one. Daniel walked toward the rear doors. And call the gardeners. I want Grace's garden restored properly before spring. Victor's expression softened. She would have liked that. Daniel stopped. Months earlier, those words might have closed him instantly. Now he simply nodded. I think she would. That evening, warm light filled rooms that had spent years in shadow. Daniel ate dinner in the breakfast room rather than at the enormous formal table. Afterward, he entered the piano room and sat beneath the lamp. His hands found the melody Naomi had played that rainy night. He missed several notes. He started again. There was nobody nearby to hear whether he played well, and for once that did not matter. Across the estate, the garden rested beneath the November darkness, no longer abandoned, only waiting for another season. Daniel finished the melody and let the final note fade naturally. He thought of Grace without closing the piano. He thought of Naomi without reaching for a telephone. Then he stood, turned off the lamp, and left the door open behind him. By early March, Naomi Carter had learned the rhythm of the Halston Grand from an entirely different position. She no longer pushed a housekeeping cart through its hallways. As a supervisor, she trained new employees, handled schedules, solved problems before guests noticed them, and spent part of each week helping coordinate an emergency assistance program for hotel workers facing sudden financial hardship. The work suited her. It was practical, demanding, and useful. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, Naomi was reviewing childcare assistance applications in a quiet conference room when a receptionist appeared at the door. "There is someone here to see you." Naomi looked at the clock. "Do I have an appointment?" "No." The receptionist hesitated, then smiled. "But I think you know him." Naomi stepped into the lobby and stopped. Daniel Kong stood near the tall windows in a charcoal suit, alone. No Victor. No visible associates. No carefully arranged meeting. Just Daniel, holding 2 paper coffee cups and looking slightly less certain than Naomi had ever seen him. She walked toward him. "Mr. Kong." His expression softened. "I was hoping we had moved past that. You were my employer. Former employer." Naomi glanced at the cups. "Is one of those an attempt at bribery?" "Coffee. That depends on the coffee." Daniel handed her one. 2 sugars. No cream. Naomi looked at him, surprised that he remembered. "You came all the way here to bring me coffee." "Not exactly." For a moment, the man who could command entire rooms seemed to struggle with a simple sentence. Naomi waited. Daniel finally said, "Would you have coffee with me?" She raised the cup slightly. "I thought we were already doing that." A quiet laugh escaped him. "Somewhere that does not involve your workplace." Naomi studied his face. There was something different in him. The old stillness remained, but it no longer felt like a locked door. "As my former employer?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "As Daniel." Naomi did not answer immediately. Months earlier, she had left because she refused to become the bridge he used to avoid crossing his own grief. Now she needed to know whether he had crossed it. "How is the garden?" she asked. Daniel seemed to understand the test. "The roses were pruned last week. Victor thinks I am interfering with the gardeners too much." "You probably are." "Probably." "The orchid?" "Still alive." Naomi smiled. "The piano?" Daniel's gaze held hers. "I play badly several nights a week." Something warm moved through her expression. "And Grace?" The question was quiet. Daniel looked toward the sunlight pouring through the lobby windows. "Still part of my life." He paused. "Just not the reason I refused to have one." Naomi felt the answer settle between them. He had not come asking her to save him. He had not offered money, a position, or a reason she owed him anything. He had simply come as a man asking a woman whether she wanted to spend an hour with him. "There is a cafe across the street," Naomi said. "I finish at 5:30. Daniel glanced at his watch. "I can wait." "For 2 hours?" "I have learned patience." Naomi gave him a skeptical look. "Let us not exaggerate your progress." Daniel laughed, and this time the sound came easily. At 5:30, Naomi walked out of the Halston Grand wearing her own coat, carrying her own bag, with no uniform connecting them and no employment agreement defining the distance between them. Daniel held the door open, then waited for her to choose the direction. Naomi pointed across the avenue. They walked side by side toward the cafe, neither leading the other, while the early spring sunlight stretched across Manhattan. By late May, the garden at the Kong estate no longer looked like a memorial sealed behind iron. White roses climbed the restored arbor, new leaves filled the maple trees, and water moved through the small stone fountain again. Naomi stood just inside the open gate, wearing a soft blue dress instead of a housekeeping uniform, and smiled at the sight of Daniel kneeling beside a rosebush with gardening gloves on his hands. "Victor was right," she said. Daniel looked up. "About what?" "You are interfering with the gardeners." He rose and brushed a little soil from one glove. "I prefer supervising. That is what interfering people call it." Daniel smiled. Their coffee across from the Halston Grand had become another coffee the following week, then dinner at a quiet neighborhood restaurant, then long walks where neither of them had to perform the roles that first brought them together. Daniel never asked Naomi to return to work for him. Naomi never asked him to erase Grace from his life. Slowly, they learned each other without obligation. That afternoon, Daniel showed her the roses Grace had planted during their first spring at the estate. Some were original. Others had been replaced where the roots could no longer recover. Naomi touched one pale bloom carefully. "It is beautiful. It is different," Daniel said. "I used to think different meant I had failed to preserve it." Naomi looked at him. "And now?" Daniel watched the branches moving gently in the warm breeze. "Now I think keeping a garden alive means accepting that it will change." Naomi said nothing. She did not need to. Later, as evening light settled across the mansion, they walked inside. The curtains were open throughout the first floor. Fresh flowers stood in the dining room. Somewhere near the kitchen, Patricia was laughing with another employee, and nobody lowered their voice because Daniel was home. Then music reached Naomi from the piano room. She stopped. Daniel had walked ahead of her and was now seated at the instrument. He began playing the melody she had touched on that rainy night months earlier. He still missed a note near the middle. Naomi smiled from the doorway. Daniel noticed her, but continued until the final chord faded. "You have improved," she said. That sounded dangerously close to praise. "Do not get used to it." Daniel moved slightly on the bench, leaving space beside him. Naomi remained at the doorway. "Why are you standing there?" he asked. Her expression softened. "I was waiting to be invited." The words carried more meaning than either of them needed to explain. Daniel looked at the empty place beside him, then back at her. "You are." Naomi crossed the room and sat beside him. On the piano stood Grace's photograph, no longer hidden away and no longer surrounded by silence. Naomi glanced at it, then at Daniel. There was no competition between memory and possibility. Grace belonged to the life Daniel had loved. Naomi belonged to a future he was finally willing to choose. Daniel placed his hands on the keys again. "Play with me." Naomi nodded. Their first notes were imperfect, then steadier. Outside, the restored garden moved beneath the spring wind. Inside, the house carried music again. Naomi had never replaced the woman Daniel lost, and she had never healed his heart for him. She had simply reminded him that a broken heart was still a living one, and Daniel had finally chosen to let his life